Hi everyone, and welcome to the first part of the analysis module, in which we are going to learn about mapping the moving parts of an argument. What do we mean by the moving parts? Essentially, the moving parts in an argument include all the different factors, people, stakeholders, narratives, and different things that operate in the world that could impact the argument or are impacted by the argument. These factors will include all the stakeholders and actors, including their subgroups of stakeholders relevant to the argument, as well as their interests, abilities, the forces in their surrounding that influence them, and the internal forces that influence them, such as their beliefs, biases, and so on. It is important to identify them before beginning the analysis. This will help you identify the points that connect your argument to the debate, which is where you want your analysis to be directed in the first place. Because this module is focused on analysis, we will focus on mapping the moving parts of a given argument. However, it is important to note, in advanced stages, you can also map the moving parts of a clash or even a full motion. And oftentimes it is useful and will help you come up with arguments in the first place, which is often what I teach in lessons about how to come up with arguments in preps. But more on that when we talk about argument generation in a different module. Today, we will assume that there is one argument you have already chosen, and now you're trying to map what are the moving parts of this specific argument to think of ways to analyze it. The methodical way to identify as many of the moving parts in the debate is to follow a 4-steps questionnaire with yourself. Firstly, ask yourself, who are the main stakeholders impacted by the argument or relevant to the argument in general? Secondly, break down these stakeholders into their subgroups. Thirdly, ask yourselves who and what these stakeholders influence. Lastly, ask yourselves who and what these stakeholders are influenced by. This process can and should be done fairly repetitively, meaning that after you have mapped all of them, most of these can be redone. So after you have broken a group of stakeholders into subgroups, you can usually break the subgroups into smaller groups. After you have asked who these stakeholders influence, you can usually ask, okay, and what are the second and third degree influences? Once X has influenced Y, what does Y influence? And this will help us generate later on more maps to show why our argument is correct and help us think of ideas for why it's true, as well as identify what are the different burdens for our argument that are likely to be challenged. More on that in the next part of this module on burdens of proof. I'm going to now give one demonstration on how to do that. And this will be an argument that will be reused for later videos in this module. However, in future videos, I will not explain the example on the video. You will be able to see it in the script below. For this video, your opposition in the motion, this House believes that environmental advocacy groups should prioritize lobbying governments to change environmental policies, e.g., cap and trade, banning environmentally harmful chemicals, and so on, rather than convincing individuals to take responsibility for their own contribution to environmental damage, e.g., reducing or recycling waste and taking public transit. You, again, oppose the motion, and you want to prove the argument, convincing individuals to take personal responsibility will lead to political change more effectively. How do I map the moving parts? Let's use the 4 steps that we described. Firstly, identifying the main stakeholder. In my argument, the main stakeholder, because I am convincing individuals, is individuals. Secondly, dissecting the stakeholder into its subgroups. What subgroups can we identify for individuals that we try to convince? Some of them are activists who are already allies to the cause and only need to be motivated to go on. Some of them are passive supporters who do agree with us and already support environmental change, but are not mobilized to act on it. Some of them are opposers that are skeptical about climate change. Some are fence sitters that are just uncertain. Some are people whose jobs rely on polluting industries and are hesitant because of that to adopt climate policies. Some of them will be people who will be directly affected by climate change, say if they are in areas of high pollution or areas prone to natural disasters. Third step, what or how these actors impact in the world. Firstly, they vote. They vote on politicians and policies and so on. Secondly, they can go and protest. They can donate to different charities and organizations. They can change their own individual habits. They can shape the view of people in their proximate environment and create waves of effect. They can do media and social media activism. They can change market trends via changing their consumer preferences and buying greener products. Fourth step, what impacts those actors, or what are they influenced by? They are impacted by their own moral views, the information available to them, such as, is climate change real? If it is it man-made or natural? They are probably also impacted by peer pressure and tribalism for their political affiliation, their employment and dependency on their employment, their personal safety concerns, caring for their kids and future generations, their cost of living, self-esteem and guilt associated with doing the right thing for the environment, fear of the future associated with environmental change, and of course, a bunch of psychological biases like confirmation bias, optimism bias, risk aversion, and so on. How can we use all of these to build a good argument? More on that in the next videos. How can you practice this in home? Just like we did right now with the example. You just do this process for an argument in your free time. We suggest setting yourself measurable targets so that you can track your progress and gradually increase difficulty with harder goals. There are 3 main parameters you can use in your goals to increase the difficulty for the specific practice on mapping the moving parts. First is the number of moving parts to find. Second is the time limit you give yourself. Third is the breadth or scope of the moving parts you map. Are you mapping it for one argument, for a full clash, for the whole motion, and so on? To start, we suggest beginning with unlimited time and aiming for 5 different moving parts to identify in one argument for your first goal. Once you have started mastering it, you can increase the difficulty gradually from there. Good luck in practice and see you in the next videos.